Hello and welcome to Deprogrammed. I'm your host, Carrie Smith, and I'm very excited today to be joined by Sara Higdon. Hello, Sara.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Sara is the host of her own podcast, which is just called the Sara Higdon Podcast. Is that right?
Yeah, you can find me on Apple and Spotify as well, other than YouTube, and it's under Transform to Freedom.
Oh, Transform to Freedom. Thank you. So we'll put those links in the description. For anyone who doesn't know, Sara, I did get to appear on Sara's show, but I was getting over COVID and I blacked out. I don't remember anything. I had brain fog. So if you've already seen that, this will all be new for me. I may talk about the same things with you, Sara.
Yeah, that's fine. It's 100% fine. Now, you weren't getting over COVID though when we were in Texas together, so.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that was fun. I love
was
when
so much
people
fun.
visit.
It was fun. We realized we are like the same person, so.
Yeah, we had what was that one place? I took Sara to the woke part of Austin, which is it's all of Austin. But I took her specifically to Congress, which is the most woke part, and we went in this one place that had an AOC shrine with all these
They
candles.
had the candles. They had all the candles. Yeah.
It was really creepy. But my thing is I like to ask questions innocently. So I went up, they had one of the Nancy Pelosi candles, like a saint candle, and I went up and asked them, do you have this with Trump on it? This is cool. Do you have it with Trump on it? And the guy's like, no.
It was so much fun.
Yeah. So do you have why don't you tell anyone members of our audience who are not familiar with you a little bit about yourself and why you started doing a podcast?
Yeah, so well, my background, I graduated college and I spent 7.5 years as a logistics officer in the Army. After I did that, I moved to Atlanta. If you can't tell, I am a transsexual, so I've transitioned in the last few years, started realizing that there is a need for somebody to kind of combat some of the craziness that we've seen in this community. So getting out on camera and kind of being out here and being a voice against that has really been what's motivated me. But politics has always been one of my bigger interests as well. So I try to talk about all of that stuff as well. I have interviews because I just like to talk to people. It's one of my favorite things to do. So I just come on and have people come on and have a conversation. It's so much fun.
So you call yourself transsexual?
Yes.
And that's different? Is that purposefully you're not calling yourself transgender?
Yes.
Why is that?
I think the term transgender basically started to come out in 2016, and that's when we really started seeing the community become kind of crazies. Transsexual is the term that you actually are diagnosed with gender dysphoria and you begin to, take hormones and everything like that to transition. In the community, transsexuals have been more ostracized because we do believe that you have to have gender dysphoria to be trans. And I've even gone out quite a bit and said, this whole new non-binary thing like that is not trans. That is using the trans moniker, but it doesn't fit with what the term trans used to be. So I actually fight against using the umbrella term that they like to call it of transgender.
So when you say it doesn't fit with what trans used to be, what do you mean? And what do you mean by gender dysphoria?
So gender dysphoria is what the old DSM term used to be for the mental disorder that is essentially feeling that you're the other sex that you were, other than what you were born as. And so it's diagnosable by a therapist. And it used to be what was used before you could even get on hormones. You had to have a gender dysphoria diagnosis. They took it out of the DSM-5 recently, though.
Just so I'm clear, I always heard the shorthand for gender dysmorphia. Did you just drop your headphones?
Yes,
we're good. Even with that, less technical problems than my first episode. So, what was I gonna say? Oh, so the shorthand version definition I always heard for gender dysphoria was kind of like body dysmorphia, and I mean different in that you look at yourself and you don't, what you see doesn't represent what's you want to see on the inside. Is that right? Or is it like feeling like you're born in the wrong body?
I don't like the term feeling like you were born in the wrong body. But I guess that's kind of the best way to describe it, because when you look in the mirror, because saying that you're born in the wrong body kind of assumes a delusion. I kind of hate when people say that trans people are delusional, when it's actually quite the opposite. If I look in the mirror, I have anxiety over the stuff that I know I don't like, the stuff that doesn't allow me to pass as a woman. So that is what gives me dysphoria. That it gives you, and dysphoria can be more or less just a symptom of depression and anxiety over not passing the way that we think that we should, or looking the way that we should. It's similar to a body dysmorphia. A lot of times, though, even body dysmorphia, somebody could think that they are super fat, but they're anorexic thin. You know, they look in the mirror and they see something that's not there. So it's almost the opposite of that.
Okay. And when you said before that, for example, the non-binary is a departure from what trans used to be, what do you mean by that?
So, well, like this whole term of rapid onset gender dysphoria, meaning that you were never dysphoric until you hit puberty, and then you started to get like uncomfortable with your body going through puberty. You never showed signs of it and everything like that. That used to be considered a myth in the community, because it used to be widely known that this is something that you were born with. It was something, and it's widely known that there was hormone imbalances in the womb that have created your brain to function, to develop the way that it was in the womb, and that's kind of what carried you through. Most transsexuals that I know have stories, they knew something was wrong at the age of 4, and I'm no different. I mean, I tried a dress on for the first time when I was 4 years old. Nobody knew, and I even knew then that something was different about that. You know, I was self-aware.
This aligns with some of the, I haven't read a lot of research about it, but I've read some, and it aligns with some of the stuff I've read that said gender dysphoria mostly affected young people, as young as 2 to 4, and it was mostly biological males, mostly boys. Is that line up? Is that correct?
That's yeah. Throughout history, transsexualism has been mostly males, and recently it's this whole new woke non-binary and everything like that has really been spiked in females. And there's a number of reasons why this could be, but it's really interesting to see that a lot of these new people that are coming out are females, and they're coming out as non-binary, and it's basically a self-ID assessment, because it doesn't necessarily mean that you're transitioning at all. Some people just go and they have their breasts removed, or it's like almost like anybody that's gender non-conforming is now coming out as non-binary, because they don't feel comfortable in basically the stereotype roles of their given sex. But they don't necessarily feel like they're the opposite sex either, so they're not going to transition to the opposite sex. They might do stuff like, again, have double mastectomies or have surgeries, but they won't start hormones and all this different stuff. It's like, that's where this whole gender is a spectrum has kind of run amok, because it's really, if you look at it how they use it, nobody is male or female, nobody's man or woman, because nobody fits neatly in, any of those given sex characteristics, like the stereotypicals. And it's really interesting because they fight against sexist stereotypes, but that's what they use to define man, woman, and everything else. Like the whole thing that happened on Dr. Phil with Matt Walsh, she asked them to define what a woman is, and they couldn't define it. They said it's up to the individual to define it. And what's really interesting is, if it's up to the individual to define it, then it means nothing, because it can mean anything to anybody.
Yes.
So, but if they were to really go through and admit, like, what it means, it would be they can't admit it because it would be based off of sexist stereotypes,
Yes.
not based off of biology.
Isn't it weird in that way? I've been thinking about how the trans part of social justice activists, the trans part of that ideology, has sort of come to this place of just reinforcing the so-called sexist stereotypes that the third wave feminists used to be fighting against. So now you've got this weird schism where you've got these third wave feminists who are called TERFs, trans exclusionary radical feminists, because they believe biological sex is real, and some of them are more like they push against having trans women in spaces for women and things like that. So they get called TERFs, and then you've got the more like fourth wave intersectional feminists, TRAs, they're called, trans rights activists, who
trans radical active or radical trans. I think it's trans radical.
Trans
you
radical.
Could say trans rights. I always say trans radical, but
I'm gonna say that
because they are. It's very radical. It's kind of like social justice warrior, right? It's a radical term.
So, how do you think this evolved? I mean, how do you, as someone who, well, first of all, let me back up. I'll ask a personal question. If I get too personal at any point, you can say I don't.
No, I'm an open book.
I see. Again, I figured I'm in a pretty much open book too. I'm like, you could ask me almost anything. So, at what point, you said you were around 4 years old when you first started having these symptoms of gender dysphoria.
Yeah.
At what point did you decide to transition? And at what point were you made aware of like all of this ideological battle that's happening?
So it's that, I mean, that's a good question too, because my story has been a long one. I knew early on in my life that something was different. But I didn't even start taking hormones until I was 31 years old. And so the process to go through there was a long and confusing process. So, because once you hit puberty, it was really interesting because I'm also bisexual. And so I was into girls, but I was envious of girls. Like there was a part of me that always wanted to know what it felt like to be a girl, and I always felt right, and that's what I always would imagine and stuff like that. And so going through puberty was a really confusing time. And I guess if I look back at it, I could say that I was interested in men too, but I never admitted it even to myself at the time that I was interested in men. It kind of same thing going through college. It was just something that was suppressive. And then, as my mom would say, is that I was doing everything that I thought I was supposed to do as a male. So I joined the army when I got out of college, hypermasculine career field.
I was gonna ask, is that just me noticing that there seem to be a lot of trans people who have transitioned from male to female who were in the army?
No, that's not just you, because it was interesting because even early on, I'm not even in my transition. Had always done a lot of research on this, even though I never like went full and acted on stuff. But you start to realize that the studies have shown that there is a higher population of trans people in the military, trans and LGBT people in general, in the military or in dangerous jobs like police and firefighters than there are in general population. So it's like what, 1% of the population, where it might be like 3% of the military. Those are just stats made up, but that's
why do you think that is? You said you were trying to prove something, or is it like hyper masculine, or?
So I think that there is a couple things. You're trying to hide it from yourself. You're trying to trick yourself, and you're trying to do something that is hyper masculine, and trying to be this person that you're supposed to be, almost overcompensating for what you actually feel inside. And then I also think just being in the military at that point, I was never suicidal, but I always thought, if I die, I die, and this never comes out about me, type thing. And so it was something that it was like, okay, but like I said, I've never been suicidal, but it's something to look at. Like that's one of the reasons why people might join some of those fields, is because they don't value their life as much as the next person. And what's interesting is because after I joined the military, then about 2 years after I met my now ex-wife, right at the beginning of when I got into the military, we got married. We were married for a few years, and I came out to her. And at this time, I thought I was just a cross-dresser, and that was like a fetish that I had and everything like that. I came out to her in 2014 because something inside me finally bubbled up so much that I had to let it out. I had to express that this is something that I've felt my entire life. And so when it finally came out, it was great. I mean, it put our marriage through a lot of issues, and we ended up separating a year and a half later.
And so you came out at first as a cross-dresser.
Yeah. Yeah, because like I said, I thought it was just something that was more like a sexual fetish than anything else. Didn't know if it was anything more than that. Until I started to explore more.
Can I cut in for a second with the?
Yeah.
Are you? I'm sure familiar with the term autogynephilia.
I am.
Do you ever get asked about that? Do you? What do you think about that?
Yeah, people ask me about that. I've talked about it on a couple of different shows. I have no issue with the term in and of itself, because it is a real thing.
It means men who get. Doesn't it mean men who get off on seeing themselves as women? Am I defining that wrong?
Well, okay. It's men who are sexually aroused by themselves as women.
Okay.
So it is a sexual fetish, which I think a lot of people probably might go through the process, and typically they're only. I will go back for a second. Typically, they are only attracted to women. But it's really interesting because, like, for me, anytime that I ever had, sexual fantasies or anything like that, it was always as a woman with men. So I have no issue. Maybe I have had autogynephilia. I mean, but I think a lot of people go through this, and transsexuals go through kind of the same process where we think we're probably just cross-dressers. That's the way it starts, but it started at an early age. As we start to explore, like, going out into the world. So the way that the community used to set it up is it used to be cross-dresser, transvestite, and then transsexual. So transvestite is kind of the intermediary where instead of just cross-dressing for sexual satisfaction, you cross-dress and go out into the world and try to pass, but you're not living full-time as the opposite sex. And then transsexualism, you actually begin the process to live full-time as the opposite sex. So when you're looking at autogynephilia, it might start that way. That might be the way that it shows up. Mm-hmm. But as you start to, like, for me, when I separated from my wife, I started to explore. I started to go out in public and pass. That's almost when it became not about sexual gratification, but it felt comfortable. Mm-hmm. It's what felt more comfortable to me to live full-time female. And so when I finally got out of the Army 2 years later, I moved to Atlanta. Again, explored for a little bit longer, but I was living every weekend as female because that's the way I felt more comfortable. And then when I finally came out to my family, it was like an open door, and I started taking hormones about 6 months later. And so sometimes autogynephilia, it's transsexual self-masking as autogynephilia, but you're just suppressing the want and urge to actually transition. But now with the new wave era, it's not necessarily how it's happening. People are, they're not seeking therapy to see if it's just that sexual urge or if they actually want to transition as a whole. It's more, you're probably trans if you have these desires. And that's where the issues we're seeing now.
Yeah. So when do you think, about what time did that become common? Because we've also, I've been able to interview Buck Angel before, who's a trans man. He goes by Trampa.
I love him. I interviewed him as well last year, and I love him so much. He is awesome guy.
And so one of the things he talked about was, he opposes transing children in terms of putting kids on hormones and mm-hmm. hormone blockers and stuff. And he was talking about how being one of the first people in California to go through sex change operation, or I think the first maybe, it was a long process of therapy and figuring out Is it where's the root of my problem? Is that what it was like for you, was sort of investigating all these different avenues? And do you see any problem with the way that we are culturally, like as a society, how we're treating this issue now?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, it wasn't as much with the help of therapy or anything like that. It was, though, working through it myself, trying to figure out what this was. So was I just satisfied enough just dressing at home, doing that? And it was no. Like I said, when I kind of started going out in public and everything like that, and actually it started, like I said, it just started feeling natural as it happened. I see as society right now, we have an issue with affirmation only care for children is probably the biggest issue we're seeing right now, because basically they're starting with this endpoint that you're probably trans and then trying to work through it to get there, instead of starting at, well, why do you feel this way, and trying to work through it with the person. This really started happening. I always talk about it because in 2015, if you remember, gay marriage was legalized in the United States. In 2016, this is interesting because I was at Fort Bragg, North Carolina at the time. In 2016, Charlotte, North Carolina had they were basically forcing businesses to allow anybody who self-identified into whatever restroom that they wanted to go to. And the state of North Carolina took the bait and banned trans people from going into the restrooms that they were, presenting as if they were transsexuals. So that caused the whole, and then so these kids are more, they want to fit in somewhere. And so I think it's more like the goth, like the transition was like the goth to emo to non-binary, or scene kid in there, scene kid, non-binary. But the difference between all of the other ones in this new crowd is they have activism at their back as well. So now they're involved in something bigger than themselves, bigger than just who they're identifying as. And so they have this activism behind them. And so now they feel like they're doing something good. So it's even more of an issue for society.
Yes, that's an interesting way of putting it, the goth to emo to non-binary pipeline.
Yeah. I mean, because me growing up, it was the goth kids, and then you had the emo kids, and then it was, like I said, the scene kids, and then now it's and they kind of dress very similar. It's, the different haircuts, but they all dress the same. So it's like never wanting to conform to society, but conforming to your friend group.
Yes, but absolutely conforming. I was at a really cool thrift shop in Austin. Next time you come, I'll take you to this one. It's like an antique mall. It's just one of those places with tons of booths. Anyway, my husband and I were in line in front of us. I felt like an old lady because there's these 3 non-binary kids and they're waiting to check out, and they all look exactly the same. They have the same haircut. They have the same hair dye color. They're wearing the same kind of clothes. They have the same tats and the same piercings in similar places. And they're all wearing a mask. And I was just laughing to my husband, like, look at these conforming nonconformists. It's sort of like they're putting on an outfit of nonconformity.
That's exactly. You can tell. It's like, I bet that person identifies as they, them.
Yes,
that's
I know.
what it
ahead
is.
Of time. Yeah.
When transsexuals, that's the difference, is like, we just want to pass and move on. Like, we want to transition, pass, and move on. They want to be like out there, like, this is who I am, like, and not conform to society. So it's the exact opposite. Like, the original LGBT are still very much in line, whereas it's now I'm going to say the NQ plus, because it's the non-binary queer plus that are the activist wing, and they're actually kind of erasing what it means to be LGBT anti. Like, they're erasing what the original letters mean. Like, they're now they're saying that men can identify as lesbians. Like, that's where it's at. Like, if you're a non-binary, you can identify as lesbian, even though lesbian is a binary term. It doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make sense. Wait, so they can say, I am a man who is a lesbian?
I'm a man who's non-binary and I'm lesbian.
Okay.
It's really interesting. Ariel's done a lot of videos on this type of stuff too, and so it's really interesting how they conflate these terms and they erase what these terms mean. I mean, as we talked about earlier, they're erasing what the word woman means with their nonsense. So it's like whatever you think you are, you can be, as long as you self-identify as such. And that's the issue that we have.
They're getting to a place where I think this is where you can really see the influence of postmodern ideology, even though a lot of these kids now, when it gets filtered down to them through TikTok videos and Tumblrs and however they pick up gender ideology, it's become several places removed now from the theory, the postmodern theory. But you can see it's still there, and that it's almost a destruction of all meaning, a destruction of what categories mean, of what words mean. So you get to this place where if you allow that to continue, where society can't function if you can't agree on basic definitions. At some point, it's going to break down.
Exactly. It's like what is? I mean, Matt asked the perfect question on that interview. Like, what is a woman? And he said, well, it's not for me to define. He said, but you said trans women are women. So what does that mean? Like, you say something, but then you can't identify what you're actually saying. Like, you think that it's okay, and it's not. And I put it out there. I actually wrote a tweet that just said definitions. Woman. The definition of a woman is an adult human female. Trans woman, male with gender dysphoria who transitions and lives life as a woman. Non-binary, I forget exactly how I put it, but it was it was something about being woke, and if they actually looked at the definition, it was all about sexist stereotypes. I forget exactly how I put it, but it was something like that.
Yeah. A very special person. It's like, go ahead.
Because like a lot of us, you'll hear me and all the other like trans people on our side that we say trans women are not women, trans women are trans women. And it's a very important distinction to make. It's fine to make this distinction. I will never be female. And so why is this an issue? If I was born female, I wouldn't be trans. Like I wouldn't have to go through that. It's not something that's big and scary for me to say that I am male. It's important for me I can acknowledge that.
Yeah.
Now I think where people get really rubbed about that, and especially on the woke side, is because there are people, I mean, if I'm treated as a woman every day in society, that's one thing. People usually use she, her, everything like that, treat me with very much respect. And so that's where they're saying trans women are women, because I get treated like a woman every day. But and that's not even the issue. The issue is when we're actually just having discourse online and we're trying to make these distinctions. Like what happens actually offline every day in real life outside in society really has no bearing on, or what we talk about online really has no bearing in how you treat people offline.
Yeah. Have you started to notice a backlash? And I'll ask this because I think society was tipping to a place where it was more of a libertarian, live and let live. What does it hurt me? How you choose to identify, or if you choose to live as a woman. And now I think we're getting to this place where the authoritarian kind of elements of the part of the social justice ideology that's authoritarian, that wants to control people, has really, with its insistence on forcing people, I think is starting to create a backlash, or already has created a backlash that might grow. Have you encountered any of that?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the reason why I have my platform. That's the reason why I have my channel. That's the reason why I'm out here doing this, is because I've seen so much that small portion of the community, because we know it's not a large portion of trans people. The large portion of trans people have transitioned and then go stealth and then never really talk about it. But that very small portion of community that gets the recognition from media and everything like that, that they create this perception of us. So when they are creating a perception of us, and the vast majority of people out there have never met a trans person in their lives, so they don't know that we're not with this character that they have created of us. So for me to be out here, and I advocate for more people like me to be out here, because we need to show just general public that that's not who we are. Like we're not like that. But there has been even a big section, or a small section now, of the gender critical movement, which is kind of the ones that they call the, that's the left will call them TERFs. Yeah. So it's gender critical because we're critical of the gender ideology that the left has created. So it's like the left, they got the TRAs and the gender critical. Well, the very far side of the gender critical movement has tried now to deplatform people like me, Buck Blair, Mars, and a whole host of other ones. They don't want any trans people. They say there's no good trans people, so we shouldn't even be platforming them. So there is this kickback from the very far social conservatives, and actually most of them aren't even conservative. Most of them are very feminazi, social justice people too. So a lot of it's a fight on the left.
That's interesting.
Social conservatives, well, they may disagree with me. They never called for me to be deplatformed, and generally, other than nasty comments online, I get treated very well in person by conservatives. I hang out in conservative circles because that's where I came from. I came from the right before I moved more libertarian.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting that you say it's mostly different parts of the left, maybe mostly fighting over this.
Yeah.
And that makes sense to me, because I think some of the gender critical, like the third wave, radical feminists, I kind of view, my background, and this whole show is about leaving social justice. It's about me talking to people about different aspects of social justice. And I view social justice as like a big umbrella, and underneath it, you have the critical race theory, and you have queer theory, and gender ideology, and all these different things. You have feminism. And so some people, sometimes to me, it seems like they wake up in one area and they wake up to part of this belief system, but they're still in the belief system in other ways. So I sometimes view that some of the, I guess, the most aggressive, I would say, gender critical people is like, they're still accepting a lot of what the belief system says about men and about patriarchy and about sexism and oppression, but they're rejecting the trans part of the belief system. Or in Dave Chappelle's case, since I know you did a really popular video about Chappelle's kind of awake to some of the stuff with gender ideology, but he still accepts a lot of the race-based stuff in the belief system. So people can kind of wake up.
Even in his last special, he said he wishes that the Black community, the people fighting for the Black community, could take a page out of these trans activists.
No, Dave, no.
he was talking because of the success that they've had.
Yeah, I know.
But yeah, you're right. It is. And he's very much got some leftist views, but the left wants to cancel him for stuff like that. It's really interesting to watch them kind of eat their own. I mean, look what's happened with Whoopi Goldberg right now.
Oh yeah, I've seen that. They will.
And so, she's talking, the Holocaust comments that she made about not being about race. And so now they're talking about, she got a 2-week suspension when Gina Carrero was fired for much less.
Oh, I didn't even know they had suspended her. What they suspended from?
I think that came out this morning. So her comments about the Holocaust, the View suspended her for 2 weeks.
Wow, that's that's a whole nother discussion. But my opinion on that is like, I didn't watch the whole thing in context. I should watch it. But the clip that I read a transcript of, it made sense to me what she was trying to say, even if she said it clumsily, which is, and maybe if I read the whole context, I won't agree with her. But in the short part I saw, it was like, this is the way I view it. Humans throughout history have continually found a way for groups to oppose other groups and to dehumanize and scapegoat other groups. And sometimes they do it on the base of race, like in the Holocaust, or the base of race and religion, like in the Holocaust. And other times they do it on the basis, right now they're doing the basis of vaccine status, and they'll do it on the basis of anything. And then social justice does it on the basis of race. They'll do it on the basis of anything. And so what I thought she was trying to say, and maybe this is a generous thing, but I thought she was trying to say that underneath the race and religious issue, at the root of this, you've got groups dehumanizing groups of people dehumanizing groups. maybe that's too generous, but I was like, well, I get it if that's what she was
I could
trying
be
to say.
generous with her too and say that she was confusing the Jewish religion with the Jewish the race of being Jewish. And so she said that the Nazis were not trying to erase the Jews because of race.
Well,
they were
that's
trying
wrong.
to do it because that's
Yeah.
what they tried to correct her on. That's where she had said that, and it was and so that's where she was gotten in trouble, because she said it wasn't because of race, it was based on religion. And
Oh,
everybody's
I
like,
see.
no, they said it was on the race. And I think a lot of people don't realize that they're like, because a lot of people can consider Jewish people to be white. And I think that's where people have issues. And I think that's where she got in trouble, is
Oh,
because she was saying Jewish people are basically white and Jewish people
oh,
are Jewish
no.
people. Yeah.
Okay. If that's what I was, okay. If the less generous interpretation is if she was trying to say it's not about race because they're both groups are white people, that's no.
Yeah.
But I am surprised that I was like off of Twitter all day. By the time this airs, this will be old news. But this is currently happening, and I was so happy I wasn't on Twitter yesterday because I'm like, there's always some outrage, and I don't really care.
Yeah.
But to get back, I do care about
Yeah.
some of the outrages. I guess I care about when I think they hit on something. I guess it's when I think they hit on something that's a growing problem, and one of the growing problems I see is this. Is that gender ideology is becoming so pervasive and so unquestioned. It's like the science, trust the science, that
Yeah.
it's starting to affect kids. That's my biggest concern about it. And
Yeah.
we just had on my first guest on the show was Billboard Chris, who travels around the country talking about how kids can't consent to puberty blockers. Is
Yeah.
that an opinion that you share with him? Are you in the, or do you have a different take?
So I will say, because I've actually changed my opinion on this. I've thought that puberty blockers could be a good thing. I always thought that they were being way overprescribed, though. Again, with affirmation only care, it was like as soon as you go in, you say I'm trans. It's like after one session, the therapist is like, we got to get your kid on puberty blockers. Well, that's not the right answer. As the science has started to come out more, puberty blockers does more damage than what they originally thought. Originally, they started using puberty blockers because they've always used it for early onset puberty. So some kids that would start puberty naturally at like 8-9 years old, they would put it on Lupron until they were 10-11, because you don't want somebody who's like the size of a 7-year-old going through puberty. That's not the right time for them to go through puberty. But they would get them to like 10 or 11 and then have them go through puberty at a normal age that like normal kids do. And it never stunted any growth and development or anything like that. Well, when you start to realize that if you stop puberty, it does stunt the growth and development of the brain until, whenever you start it back up. So there has been studies that show that puberty blockers can lower IQ. So that is an issue for me. The studies that have always been out there was always, so there's the Lisa Littman study, which showed that 80% of gender nonconforming kids would desist and, not be gender nonconforming by the age of 16. Now there's flaws in that study because it was anybody who showed signs of being a tomboy, tomgirl, anything like that. But it was that, so it wasn't necessarily just trans kids that thought they were transsexuals or had gender dysphoria. But the point of that is there are about 20% of kids that feel gender nonconforming that would do well on puberty blockers, or not puberty blockers, but to transition young. And it would probably help. And we know that for those kids, it probably would save their lives, or at least
you mean
help.
When you say there's about 20% of kids who would do well to transition. What do you mean? Do you mean like start living?
Yes.
Or
I mean,
dressing?
so I believe, I believe in the old approach used to be watchful waiting, which is allow your kids to explore, if they start, social transition before any medical transition for a number of years. So social transmission means absolutely living as the opposite sex, dressing, all that stuff and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, but you've not medically transitioned. Now they're mixing in puberty blockers with the social transition. And that's the issue that I think a lot of us have, because we know that after the age of 16, the detransition rate would drop to about 1.3%. Again, this is probably back in 2017 before all of this gender activism started. Because now we are seeing it being a trend, and so that number would jump up. I've actually been kicked off Reddit groups for saying transgenders are real. And when the detransition rate skyrockets, it's going to hurt actual trans people because of the kickback, like you had said. And those people on the left, they don't like that. But I can watch like documentaries. Like there's a documentary, it's called Transhood on HBO. It's actually very, very well done because it shows kind of both sides. It shows a trans boy and a trans girl who absolutely, you can look at them and be like, they are probably 100%, they are happy in their own skin being who they are. They had one kid who was 10 years old, and it was like his mom was forcing him to do it. And then it was another kid who was like 4 years old who ended up saying by the end of the video was like, no, I'm not. And then that mom basically went fully the other direction. Like trans people don't exist after she was bought into her 4-year-old son was a girl type thing. So it's really interesting, but I think that there are very few, and we need to figure out how we can find those few that would do well.
And to be clear, I want to correct myself because I realized when I was quoting you, I said 20% of kids, and what I meant to say was you were talking about 20% of kids who say they're trans, 20% of those kids.
The 20% of the gender non-conforming kids that kind of have like tomboys, tomgirls, any of those people that think that they might be the opposite gender when it comes to being trans. Yeah. So any of those 20% of the full spectrum of gender nonconforming, which is only about 0.5% when you really look at general society.
Right. I think the issue, there's a couple things that you and I will definitely agree on now, which since I guess it sounds like you oppose now puberty blockers with kids.
I do.
I just I don't support any kind of medical intervention when you're too young to consent to it that might potentially sterilize you or cause other problems. And I know there are some countries like Finland that have now banned it, which I think is interesting. Until you're an adult. I'd have to think more about. Here's what I see happening. I see schools are now introducing this concept in the form of curriculum, like the gender unicorn and what used to be the genderbread man or the genderbread person. Sorry. The gingerbread man was offensive. And so they're introducing this to kids, which any rational person can look at that and say, hey, we know that up until now, it was like a fraction of 1% of kids who were grappling with this. And now, though, we're telling all 100% of kids in this particular classroom, for example, we're telling them that they have to decide that that not everybody feels comfortable in their biological sex and they need to decide what their gender is, which is something different. And doesn't a rational person look at that and say, you're now presenting 100% of kids with the problem that only a fraction of a percent used to have, and now you're going to see numbers increase?
Yeah, you're seeing numbers increase because you do place that moniker in their head. Like it's almost like hypochondriac, right? Like you go on to WebMD and you're like, I think I have cancer, like for some small cold or something, right? I mean, that's exactly what they're doing. But again, I mean, our school systems are more focused on cultural issues now than we are about teaching kids what they need to know. all the stuff that parents should be teaching their kids, the schools think that they have a right to teach their kids now, especially when it comes to sex and gender. And I mean, the gender ideology that's being taught in schools is basically the CRT of the LGBT. You know, it's very similar. It's and a lot of what, and if you actually look at some of these
faith-based.
Well, and if you look at some of these Reddit boards, a lot of people in these that are creating these ideologies are absolute communists. Like that's one of the reasons why they didn't like me, because I didn't go along with their commie ideas in these spaces. And they're supposed to be for like helping trans people, but if you read some of the comments, it's like when they post news articles, it's very much communist propaganda all over these boards. So it's very much it's the same curriculum, it's the same tenets that you're pushing when you're pushing CRT and stuff like that in schools as well.
Yeah, it's like social justice as this umbrella, and a lot of that ideology comes from, you're calling it commie. Yes, it comes from Marxism, a lot of it. Yeah. It's sort of like it's just stuck its tentacles into all these different identity groups and is animating them. Like, but it's all for this.
They get so upset when you say, you know, LGBT people have never throughout history been treated well under communism. So why do you think that you would be different? You know? and it's basically because they think that they'll be in charge.
Yeah.
Because they are the voice right now that is running the show in terms of the commies.
Arrogance. Also ignorance. Yeah. Hey, so I really want to thank you for coming on Deprogrammed and talking about all these issues. I think it's really interesting because I know that there are a lot of I'm glad there are a lot of different kinds of people who follow my shows now. There's conservatives and liberals and progressives, and then there's also some SJWs who hate watch me. Hello, but one of the things when I was on your show, I promoted it, and there was some conservative on my wall who got really upset, and this is what I'm talking about with the backlash, and they're like, how dare you talk to a trans person? And I don't get that. I'm not with that. Kind of, and I'm not saying that, I don't think that's the majority of conservatives at all. I think it's a small portion of a more authoritarian kind of part of the right. Or maybe that person was what you're saying, like a radical feminist part of the left, who knows? But they were really upset that I talked to you. And I don't understand that. I'm never gonna, on this show, if it's your first time watching, I'm never gonna say I refuse to talk to that person unless they're a giant asshole. I don't have an interest in talking to assholes.
Yeah, exactly.
So, like, help me figure out why you're such a dick. I'm kidding.
Exactly.
No,
I mean,
but
like I told you, I disagree with Matt Walsh, but I invited him on my channel. So I would love to have a conversation like that. We disagree on a lot, but I'd love to have that conversation.
Right. And then you can figure out the places where you disagree, and you can figure out the places where you agree, and help come to hopefully some kind of better understanding. So anyway, I wanted to say I really appreciate you coming on here, because I think there might be some people who it's their first time listening to an interview with a trans person, and they haven't, and like you said, their image that they've formed is based on people like oh gosh, who's that guy that got Megan Murphy banned? Jessica something. Yanev.
I mean, now their perceptions are people like Leah Thomas, who I have talked harshly about in many interviews lately. So I can't stand somebody like her who's using her and is so narcissistic about who they are and competing. And if you don't know, that's the person that's competing at UPenn and swimming and against biological women. So I can't stand people like her, and she's the one that people are getting this perception of who we are from.
Yeah. It's also, this is just something in case anybody's curious, and I want to know what you think about this as a trans person, even or as a transsexual. I'm not going to say trans person.
Yeah. Transsexual works great.
Do you, I don't think too hard about the pronoun issue. It's sort of like, I don't even, because I just think you as a her, that comes naturally. And so it's not even a big deal of trying to remind myself or something. It's just like, well, duh, Sarah doesn't even
Exactly.
look like a man. Why doesn't even, it would be weird. It would be the opposite for me to force myself to say he. And so
Yeah.
I've just, it's a personal choice thing, and it's what comes naturally. And I've just sort of, I refuse to use made up ones, because I think that you're desecrating language when you do that, and you're trying to push ideology when you come up with these new non-binary terms, and I don't want to participate in that. But I don't have a problem using a pronoun that a friend wants me to use. My issue is force. And my
Yeah.
issue is dishonest people who, if I think you're using this issue to try and push ideology, or to behave like an authoritarian, like Leah Thomas, I'm not going to use your preferred pronoun. I'm going to
Yeah.
call you he. What is your take on this? Is it complicated for you? Is it not complicated?
No,
Like,
I think actually it was in Blair White's latest video. She said, I did not spend all this money and all this time to transition to be asked my pronouns. You should know
right.
my pronouns. Like, it should be obvious to you. Now, it is really, and if I'm not passing, if somebody misgenders me, it's usually a reflex thing. They misgender, and I'm like, it just means I'm not passing well enough, right? That's on me. That's not on the person that's accidentally misgendered me. And usually they correct themselves immediately. I'm just like, it's cool. It's not a big deal. There are very few people that use like the they them pronouns where I'm like, okay, I will respect your pronouns. I did a video on the TikTok teachers, and this person that they responded to one of these videos and was denouncing this teacher. So I made it a point to use they them for this non-binary person who was condemning this teacher who's teaching this ideology. So I will,
As a
in
sign
that
of
sense,
respect.
exactly. And I think so. I'll send this to you a little bit later, but like Austin Peterson, who is a friend of mine, he actually spoke about it at Freedom Fest last year. And he said, because I'm a regular on his radio show, he used me as the example and said, if you are somebody that enjoys freedom, you're not trying to force me to do anything, you're a good person, I will respect that. And he said, because I'm a regular on his show, he said, and he has me on and calls me she and everything like that. And he says that drives the social conservatives nuts when he has me on, because like what you're talking about before, he said, so he respects people like me, and as we should. But if you are a communist and you don't believe in free speech, and you are trying to force speech, and you are trying to take away, private property rights and all this stuff, then no, because I know you don't like it. So I'm going to use anything I can to get under your skin. And I was like, that makes absolute sense. I mean, me and him had the same discussion on my YouTube channel last May, and so I don't get wrapped around the axles as much about using the correct pronouns. I do use them because I think I look at my platform as trying to get the sensible people in the middle. And if I, as a trans person, am misgendering other trans people, if somebody that's leaning towards coming to our side sees me do that and sees me disrespect somebody like that, they aren't going to be willing to come to my side. So I see myself as a little bit different. I don't begrudge anybody else on the right who sees it more like Austin sees it, and
so you're
no, I'm not
consciously
going to do it.
You're consciously aware that some of your audience is people maybe on the left who are being seduced by TRAs.
Yeah.
And
Oh yeah.
and
I
seduced by
absolutely.
social justice. Yeah.
I see. I mean, that's my voice is twofold, because I am trying to open people's eyes that are on the left, trying to, being seduced, like social justice warriors and stuff like that have been seduced by this ideology, and then they start questioning, and so they go searching for a voice of the other side. And I feel like I can be that middle voice, because I don't fully view the gender critical side the way that they think I should, and I don't view the TRAs fully the way that they think I should. And I kind of come at most stuff with a nuanced approach. Like you were talking about children. I would rather see a lot of gatekeeping for people that are age 16 and over. If we were going to set an age, 16 should be the bare minimum of what we should do for hormones or anything like that. I don't believe in surgery until after the age of 18. But a lot of conservatives and gender critical people would just would want a lot of gatekeeping even after the age of 18. And I'm more of a free spirit on that. I'm a libertarian, so I'm like, once you're over the age of 18, I really don't care. You have full bodily autonomy to do what you want.
Yeah, and once you're an adult, that's odd to me that people would be opposed
people
to.
Like when I had surgery, I had to get 2 letters for surgery. I'm like, I am 34 years old and I still have to get 2 letters from a doctor to tell me what I can do with my body. But this person over here can go get plastic surgery and get horns put in their head, and they don't have to have any mental health evaluations. Like that's messed up to me. Like I should be able to have full bodily autonomy and be able to choose. So I'm more of an informed consent advocate if you're over the age of 18. Mm-hmm. From 16 to 18, heavily into gatekeeping on anybody in that area. I think there's like I said before, there's very few people that can that would benefit from transitioning at a young age. But I don't believe in surgery until after the age of 18, no matter what, which is what we're seeing now.
You and I are we're not that far apart. I would wait on all hormones or medical intervention until after 18, just because we picked an arbitrary age for other things, and we've made it 18 for whatever reason, and let's just leave it that. It's like, you got to wait till you're that old to get. That's just the way I view it. But you got to wait till you're that old
and
to
the
get
reason why I say 16,
the
reason why I say 16, and actually you can get. I got a tattoo at the age of 15 with parents' consent. So.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. So you can do it.
Always transgressing.
I think at the age of and then I got that tattoo removed. So
what's the lesson there?
like I said before, it's hard in this current climate to say 16 because of how much of a trend it's become, and it has to be very minimal now because it's become a trendy thing to do.
Yeah.
But we do allow 16-year-olds are supposed to know the life and death consequences of driving a car, for example. The age of consent in most states is 16. I mean, so we do trust kids. And then, like I said before, as we know from older studies, is that detransition rates drop to about 1.3% after the age of 16. So you're never going to get that number to 0, even if you move that number to 25. You're never going to get that number to be 0. So I think that it helps enough, but it's really hard to advocate for when the current climate of with the current climate of mental health professionals and what I call activist therapists, because there are a lot of activist therapists who are engaging in this and are fighting for trans rights, even though which kind of tells me they're probably not looking at the best interest of their patients. So it's really hard to advocate for, and I don't know if that's the right answer. I just know that there are people that it can help, because the longer you wait, the less likely it is you'll pass. If you wait till 18 for men, you will get more people like the It's Ma'am lady, and so society has to become a little bit more open about people that are male attempting to pass as female, if we moved it to 18. But it's a really hard discussion to have. Like I said, it's hard for me to advocate for, because I do think it can help, but how do we do it in the current climate? I don't know.
Yeah, this climate is pretty crazy. It's all or nothing. I wanted to thank you again for coming on and talking about these issues. And then just, what are some other things you're interested in talking about? I know what it's like to go on shows and there's like the one story people want to talk to you about, like the story of you, right? And I've had that usually when I get invited on, they're like, tell me about leaving social justice, which is fine. That's what I want to talk about mostly, because I think it's really important and I want more people to leave it before things get too bad. But it's always interesting when people go off script and ask me about other things. So what's something else you're interested in?
What else? So it's really interesting because being the trans topic is probably my least favorite topic to talk about, I started my channel to talk more about libertarianism, liberty movement, politics, and stuff like that. I wanted to make it like that, but understanding that I have a unique perspective on the trans issue. It's important that I do talk about that, and if and so I have no issues talking about it. But yeah, I mean, politics, liberty movement, ending the war on drugs. We can talk
The liberty
so much stuff.
movement. Why don't you tell people about? I mean, this is another question I usually ask libertarians when I get them on. Is what's wrong with you guys? Like, why haven't you? I'm just kidding. Why hasn't the Libertarian Party become a viable option? I'm in my early 40s and I'm just now learning more about libertarians. Why is that?
Well, one, it's messaging. Two, it is the two-party system has completely suppressed anything that we can have. For example, like it takes 20,000 signatures in a small district to get on a ballot here in to run for U.S. House. So ballot access is probably our biggest fight that we have right now, because it's hard to get on a ballot where we have to get 20,000 signatures. The duopoly only has to get like one. It's not really fair, but that's part of the messaging issue is we libertarians hide behind those challenges and say, well, it's just not a fair fight from the beginning, so you might as well not vote for us. That's kind of the way it sounds to most other people. Libertarians have an issue with saying that, or letting people say that we can't win elections, because when it comes to sexy elections like the presidency or Senate, the federal elections that people see, we have not been as successful. Shane Hazel got 5% or 3.5% of the vote last year here in Georgia, and he was the person that everybody blamed for the Republicans losing the Senate. So apparently libertarians are super influential, even in a state where the runoffs happen, because that's what happened. It went to a runoff, so then the Republicans lost in the runoff. But I think when you look across the country, there's over 300 libertarians elected to public office across the country. So while the sexy elections are more about getting out the message, changing stuff at a local level, getting elected to local office is really what the focus is heavily on. Getting libertarians running in every election that comes up, at least having one libertarian running. Like here in Georgia, we have a lot of people running for office this year. We have my friend Angela, who's running against Marjorie Taylor Greene up in District 14. So Shane Hazel's running for governor. Chase Oliver's running for Senate. But then every single state election, we have a libertarian running in. So we're trying to do the work. But libertarians will continue just to, instead of getting out and actually doing the work, they will continue to nest and start fighting each other and say we can't win elections. And then so when you look from the outside, you're saying, well, why would I even want to be part of that if they can't even win? People like to be winners. So if we can't win, then what are we doing, type thing. Yeah. So our messaging is probably the biggest issue that we have.
Yeah. I think there might be something also innately there where you've got people who are more live and let live and don't want to necessarily have power that they lord over others, and so they're less motivated maybe than
I think that's very true. It is. I mean, people, as much as people hate authoritarianism, they think that you need authoritarianism. They can't get past this world without a government, which I'm a minarchist, so I'm not an anarchist in that sense, but
can you define, I think that's where minarchy for people?
So minarchy is, again, it's essentially anarchy, which is absent of any government, where minarchy is the only thing that a government provides is national security. So like you have a standing army, because I think if we had full anarchy, we would be in a perpetual state of Afghanistan, of where we're always in conflict with another country trying to take over and establish a government here. So at least have set up to where a national defense force to defend the borders from outside invaders. Other than that, the only other thing that a government would provide is kind of a court system to have like non-aggression principle violations between people. You would have a court system set up to like negotiate between the two parties that were one was so like a person felt like somebody had committed a violation against them, they would take them to this arbiter and they would work it out there type thing.
So would there be, how would you, I've asked this question of my co-host on Safe Space before, Carter. He's a ANCAP, and I still don't quite understand how he thinks it would function. How would would there be a police force? Like if somebody murders your brother, do you take them to some authority, or?
It's the same type of thing, except for it's all privatized. So you have a business, you basically, you would privatize the police force. I mean, as a community, you would still come together to fund like stuff like a police force and, fire department and all the stuff you need. If it's essential, the community will actually fund it. You don't need a government to force taxes out of people's pockets to do it. And like, so Larry Sharp talks about like, even people want to ask about roads. Well, don't you think that maintenance of roads or police forces, like companies, like major corporations, don't you think that they would be more willing to like sponsor police forces for protecting the citizens? You just put like their logo on the side of the car or something like that. Like that's the type of stuff that it would be. We sponsor you, so as long as you're doing the right things, we will continue to fund this protection force. In some ways, it could be, but it's more about sponsorships of those essential services. And
so
like a nonprofit, like it would be the same way as like a nonprofit would work.
My concern immediately goes to, what if the corporation sponsoring the police force is like Apple, and you start doing a blog about how Apple uses slave labor in other countries, and then the police force comes after you. But corruption can happen at the government level too, so it's not like it's
they could come after you, but the community again is what's kind of funding it. So if they came after you, the community wouldn't fund that security force. They would actually go out and get a different security company to do the policing.
Yeah.
So there's competition between security companies.
Interesting. So how long have you been like not fitting into the main political, the two party system? How long have you been a libertarian?
So I was in the army. I was a Ron Paul libertarian. I was a Ron Paul Republican. Actually more of a Tea Party Republican, because the only thing I didn't agree with Ron Paul on was foreign policy. So I agreed with having more of a military presence overseas and around the world. After doing about 5 years in the army, so this was about 2015, I started to realize, like, learning military strategy and military history and global foreign policy history, I started realizing Ron Paul was right about everything. So and then around that same time, we elected all these Tea Party members to office. And then once they got into office, they never did what they said they were going to do. Like, I was a constitutional conservative. And so I wanted smaller government, lower budgets, and they were voting for big budgets and bigger government. And so that kind of just pushed me out of the politics. I was on board to vote for Gary Johnson in 2016. So that was the first time I would have voted third party. But even then, he went too crazy down the rails, and I jumped ship from there. But I still didn't vote for the two-party system. But Joe Jorgensen in 2020 was the first time I ever voted for anybody, because I voted for I voted for Mitt Romney. Or was it Romney and McCain? I voted for both of them.
Wait, so
And
Joe Jorgensen was the first time you voted for anybody who was libertarian? Is that what you mean?
it was the first time that I voted for anybody outside of the duopoly. Yeah, anybody that was, because I voted Republican my whole life. And so Joe Jorgensen was not the first time that I voted for somebody that wasn't outside the system, because 2016 was. But Joe Jorgensen was the first time I don't regret my vote.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, Mitt Romney, John McCain, and then I wrote in Evan McMullen, which is now like a socialist commie. And I'm like, and he was running in the Constitutionalist Party in 2016. I regret all of those votes, but Joe Jorgensen is the first person that I have not regretted my vote for.
All I know about her, and the reason I couldn't vote for her, and this is when, the Democrats had pretty much lost me because they had gotten so woke and I was leaving woke. But I couldn't vote for her because there was something she said online. I can't remember what it is now, but I knew
she said it's not enough to be anti-racist. You have to be actively anti-racist.
Yeah, she said something woke, and I said, okay, goodbye.
That was the tweet that's the tweet that pushed a lot of even libertarians to not vote at all.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah. I mean, I really enjoyed her. That was a comment that it was very much a woke comment. And she was like siding with BLM. Like she used the hashtag, I think, BLM in that. And then she clarified that she doesn't agree with BLM, the organization, but the sentiments that like Black Lives Matter. But but the damage had already been done at that point. I talked to Spike Cohen on my channel about this when I interviewed Spike few months ago, and Spike Cohen was Joe Jorgensen's running mate. So we spoke about it, and he actually made some pretty good points about it, but it was enough to push people away, which was really unfortunate, because that's how fickle libertarians can be sometimes too. It's like one thing will set you to where you won't even vote, which is again why we don't get higher percentages in elections.
Why doesn't I just rewatched the movie Election? Have you seen that movie with Reese Witherspoon?
No, I haven't.
It's kind of an old movie now. You should watch it. It's about a high school election, and she plays someone I will describe as a sociopath running for president of the school council. It's a very good movie. But there's one candidate in it named Tammy who runs for president, and her whole campaign speech is, who cares about this stupid election anyway? Vote for me. And the first thing I'll do is dismantle the student body government so that none of this even exists. And so vote for me, or don't vote for me. Don't vote. Who cares? And the whole student body erupts in cheers.
Yeah.
Why don't the libertarians just come out and say something like Tammy said?
Well, we do. That's the thing, is like a lot of us do. We just say, look, I'm running for office. I want you to do what you want, as long as it's not hurting anybody else. You can, live your life and do what you want. Why is that such a big message? Like you should have full bodily autonomy. But that's the interesting thing, is most people, when you start pushing full bodily autonomy, so we hear it all the time with vaccines and stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But then if you say that the government should still have, drugs be illegal. Like you shouldn't be able to do certain drugs because the government deems it possibility. Even when you look at certain hard drugs and you say, no, those should be legal too because you have free bodily autonomy, people start putting in lines. People don't want full bodily autonomy, even though the war on drugs has been an epic failure and has only caused more gang-related issues.
Yeah.
People still, that's where people think, no, we have to have a government to still do that. Yeah, it's their line of what they're comfortable with. Like even when I talk trans issues and I say that I think if you're over the age of 18, you should be able to do with your body as you please, and you shouldn't have to be gatekept by a medical professional that's with a diagnosis if you're over the age of 18. And conservatives will be like, no, you can't do that, and all this. They'll have all these different reasons for morality like that, but you can't legislate morality. And I think that's where we as libertarians look at stuff. You can't legislate morality.
I think the left. Go ahead.
Oh, and so people are, so the left and right will both say the they don't think that people are responsible enough to take personal responsibility for their actions.
Yes.
And that's where we have the issues that we have when it comes to that stuff. Is so they all kind of think that we can legislate morality, and so the left and right, where they're both the same level of authoritarian sometimes, but on different issues. Like the right wants a theocracy and the left wants, Marxism.
Right. Yeah, I think I started to see that when I was younger, and I was a lifelong Democrat until 2018, and I was in that social justice cult for about 20 years, and it was easy for me during all that time to look at Republicans or look at people on the right and say, "Oh, they don't understand the difference between morality and legality." But now it wasn't easy for me to see it then, but I can see it now. It's just as much, if not more, rampant on the left in where we're at currently. The left is the same way. They want to tell you this should be illegal because it's immoral, because I think it's immoral. You shouldn't be able to refuse service. You shouldn't be able to say, I'm not baking a gay wedding cake because I think that's immoral and unethical, and so it should be illegal. No, it shouldn't be illegal. They should be able to say no, even if it's immoral. Like, and so they both want to do that. And I think it's getting to that place of saying, like, the government, maybe it has to do with the fact that the government's gotten so big anyway. And now we've culturally become conditioned to looking to the government to solve all our problems. It's like, no, some things are a matter of personal responsibility. It's not the domain of the government to figure out whether or not you should have an abortion, or maybe it is at a certain point. I'm going to get in trouble with some of my more conservative people here, but I personally think maybe you can tell me if this is a more libertarian perspective or not, but I think abortion, I've gotten to a place now where I think abortion's immoral. I think it's murder. But the legal definition of murder, you've got like the only scenario I can think of where one person's life resides within another person's life and is dependent on that other person's life. And so how do you protect that life without saying that the government has the right to tell the woman what she has to do? And I don't think the government has that right. Do I think it's immoral if she chooses to abort? Yes. But do I think that the government should be able to prevent her? Here's where I'm at right now, and my views they're in flux. But I kind of think it's sort of, if that baby can survive on its own outside the womb, at that point, I don't think, why abort when you can deliver? But if the baby can't survive, and it's, unfortunately, I think it's like for the government to go in and say, you can't do this. Like,
so I'm similar. I'm in a very similar place as you. I have always been very pro-life. I'm one of these people that I'm okay with, like, the heartbeat bills and stuff like that, because then there is plenty of time to take care of any issues before the baby actually has a heartbeat. And so that's one of the things that libertarians will disagree on. It's a contested issue. There's no consensus really among libertarian groups. Now, I believe that the LP is a pro-choice organization. I don't know I don't know what their stance on it is. I know that they have a written stance. But libertarians, it's all in when you make the choice that it becomes a NAP violation or a non-aggression principle violation. It's the same, that the libertarians had the same fight that liberals and conservatives had, because some people see it as not a life and it's the woman's right to choose, and some people see it as a life and it's murdered, the same way as you and I see it. Now, my issue on abortion is I don't think we're ever going to see a change on it, and it's such a divisive issue. I don't typically talk about it or worry too much about it. I did do a video on the Texas heartbeat bill, but it was very short, and it just causes so many arguments amongst people that it's like, are we ever going to see a change? Probably not. I agree with you. It's not a moral. It's one of those things, like, if you think it's murder, then we should treat it like murder type things, and it's not a morality issue. It's not a morality issue at that point, because we would treat it the same way that we would treat a murderer. So which a lot of people would see as harsh, because that baby's not born, is not viable yet, right? So I don't know. I have yeah, it's one of those issues that I don't really get too much into.
And people usually can't talk about it because they get so passionately inflamed on either side. So I appreciate you even letting me bring it up, because I know people, it's like, I just wish with some of these issues that there's, like you said, there's never going to be resolution on it, because people can't even have conversations without it being like, well, you're a murderer, well, you're a misogynist, well, you're this,
and think
you're
about
that.
it. Think about it this way, and I made this point too, is that I'm being pro-life. Conservatives are going to have to get really cool about LGBT adoptions really fast to deal with the influx in children if they were to ban abortion. So I think a lot of people would say that they would rather a mother abort the baby than put them into foster care and have the state take care of them. So there's that argument as well.
Oh, then put them in foster. Yeah, that's
but then because I mean, a lot of social conservatives don't agree with LGBT adoptions either. So there's issues there that they have to kind of. So how do you square up that if you ban abortion, then there's going to be an influx of children coming into the world? Where do you put those children if those parents don't want them? They say adoption, but there's not enough parents out there that want to adopt these kids, except for in the LGBT community. So where do your lines draw at that point?
Right.
Like, are you more for abortion, or are you more for LGBT adoptions?
I'm having to imagine who this person is in my head, so I don't know what they would say, because I don't know them. But I will say, I think that I think when it comes to something like, I mean, this issue of abortion, again, I go back to, not everything is in the domain of government, and for people who believe that it's immoral, I think we have to do a better job of changing the culture and getting to a place where women themselves are saying, I don't want to risk getting pregnant. I'm going to practice safe sex, because I don't want to, if I'm not ready for a child, I don't want to have to cross that bridge. And I'll say this as someone who, I became social justice in my late teens, early 20s at college. And the messages I was getting was, it's no big deal. Like, culturally, the messages I got were, women will deny this, but a lot of women do not practice safe sex because they view abortion as a form of birth control, as no different than, and no moral issues involved. And that's not the way I view it anymore. So
yeah, and it's really hard for me to speak on it, because it is more of a morality issue for me to speak on it, because in order for me to have a child biologically, there has to be steps taken to actually get somebody pregnant via IVF. Like, that's the only way, because I stored sperm before I even started hormones.
Can you even do that accidentally?
No, that's what I mean. Okay. There is no way to accidentally impregnate somebody.
I'm sure there's some Lifetime movie where that happened accidentally.
Oh, we use your
yeah.
I don't know. So I mean, that's what the both sides are gonna be like. Why are you don't have and both sides will tell me I don't have a right to speak on it because I'm.
Oh, well, that's nonsense. I'm so tired of people saying your identity gives you a right or doesn't give you a right. That's so stupid. Look, if you hear that, if you're new to this channel and you're hearing people tell you don't have a right to talk about this, it's a woman's issue and you're a man, or you don't have a right to talk about this, it's a woman's issue and you're a trans woman, or whatever, or you don't have a right to talk about this because you're white. That's nonsense. Your personal life experience is just one of a myriad of things that should be weighed when you give an opinion. There's also how strong your arguments are. I mean, I look at someone and I say, like, for example, if a man gives me his opinion on whether or not a woman should breastfeed, okay, the fact that he's a man, I weigh that. But I also weigh, is he a doctor? Well, that means something too. And does he have a lot of experience with this? Is he a dad? Has he seen the effects of breastfeeding and not breastfeeding? I'm going to give it some weight to that too.
Yep.
Is he a giant butthole? Like, is he a mean person that I shouldn't trust? Like, all of these things come into play. I don't just go, man, not listening, you know.
Absolutely.
Sorry, Sarah. I hate that. I hate that. I'm ranting on my own show.
No, it's good because I hate that type of stuff too, because it's like, why we all should be able to have opinions on anything, whether it affects us or not, because it is a morality issue, but it's a societal issue, you know, like is it wrong to point out that Planned Parenthood was established by a known racist? I mean, you know, Margaret Sanger was a known racist eugenicist. Like, she established Planned Parenthood, put them in minority neighborhoods as a sort of Black genocide. It's very well documented. So is that worth mentioning in this debate? Yes. And does it matter who it comes from? Absolutely not.
Correct. There's a documentary, you might know the name of it. I'm blanking on it. It's the Planned Parenthood. It's about the Planned Parenthood clinic director who ended up leaving and is now a very loud voice for the pro-life movement. And I think it might be called Unplanned. Anyway, in that documentary, or no, it's a fictionalized account of her story. And in that movie, she talks about how, or she shows a scene where Planned Parenthood is treating abortions almost like sales figures. And so the argument, and I read some interviews with her as well, the argument she's making is that how can it be something that you view as something that needs to be rare when you approach it from a perspective of, we get money, like with sales, every time we do one, let's get those numbers up. This clinic had great numbers this year, you know, and there's this incentive to perform more of them. And that's something I think that needs to be talked about. I wasn't aware of that. I was the naive person who for a long time bought into the lie that, like, oh, Planned Parenthood doesn't want there to be more abortions. They really wish there were fewer. They're just there to provide it when people need it. No.
Yeah, no, it's and that is true of any of these businesses that we're seeing. I mean, we could move it over into the COVID discussion and the vaccine discussion and say, do you think that they would actually give us the perfect vaccine that would end COVID, or do you think there's a little bit of incentive to keep this pandemic going, to put more money in their pockets and develop more vaccine upon more vaccines? There is never going to be the perfect vaccine because there is a monetary incentive to keep this going.
And that's it, folks. Last video you'll ever see on my channel.
No, I actually, what's interesting, I talked about this with Siraj Hashmi back in December, and we had this discussion, and it's still that video is still monetized. So.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I know, I'm surprised that video is still monetized.
Fingers
we talked
crossed.
about this.
You and I talked about trans issues and abortion, but now it's like COVID.
But you want to talk? But you can look at the big pharma issue, and because there's a lot of stuff even being put on it in terms of trans healthcare, that there is an incentive to make this a trend because it gets big pharma more money, and HRT, it gets surgeries more money for doctors. So the trans healthcare debate is another one where it almost incentivizes to make this more trendy, to have, you know, to transition or to take some of these surgical routes and everything, because it makes people more money. Like, there's been people in the past that have said invest in trans healthcare stocks because it's going to be a $5 billion industry here in a few years. So when you look at that, you look at dollar signs, and it's the same. Planned Parenthood, again, going back to Planned Parenthood is one of these places that does informed consent HRT as well. They're not just doing women's care. They are giving a place for trans people to get their hormones as well.
Yeah.
And so you see that, and I mean, they're one of the few places that does, which I don't mind them doing that because I agree with informed consent if you're over the age of 18, but I don't know if they're necessarily doing it over the age of 18, because when you look at Planned Parenthood as well, especially in like places like California, they will give girls birth control without their parents' consent. So are they giving hormones without parents' consent? Or
Yes.
doctor consent? So that is where we have a lot of these issues as well, even when we're talking trans healthcare, in terms of monetization, and it all stems from the monetization of healthcare procedures. And yeah,
it's turning, I mean, the population to these sort of permanent patients who have to keep going back and spending money, consumer patients. I saw a headline. I'm going to bring this up just because you mentioned it. This headline from December: 8 top Pfizer and Moderna shareholders are now $10 billion richer after media hypes the Omicron danger. And that's just from Omicron, the one phase of this whole thing, that $10 billion more in their pockets. And if you look at some of the shareholders, like the top Pfizer shareholders include the Vanguard Group and BlackRock. This is in order of how much they own. Also, top 2 owners in that same order, top 2 shareholders in the New York Times. I get to this point where I'm like, it's almost comical, like a movie, where you've got these people who have incentive for certain narratives to be put out there, who are in bed with the pharmaceutical industries and in bed with the media companies, and their business is making money. So,
well, that's BlackRock they're the biggest investor in all this stuff. They're the ones that are buying up all the houses right now to make it more of a renter society as well.
Yeah.
So you start to see, BlackRock is an issue that is kind of flying under the radar, but not even, I would like to see some of the individuals, because what was the first company that you had mentioned?
Vanguard, the Vanguard Group.
I believe people like Nancy Pelosi are invested into the Vanguard Group. So when you start to look at,
sounds plausible.
Yeah. Well, and I know, because I brought this up in December too, because it came out, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who fights against these vaccines, is invested into Pfizer and Moderna. Like if you look at her stuff, so it's like you're invested, so you're making money off of it, but so what are you really doing? Like in Congress?
Yeah, that's interesting.
The hypocrisy is kind of amazing when you look at, and again, that's the type of stuff that pushes people away from conservatives, when you actually look and see a lot of that hypocrisy. And I think because that's what pushes people away from the left. You see that they're not genuine, that they have an ulterior motive. So when you see the conservatives doing the same thing, and you came from the left, you're like, wait a second. And I think that's what pushes more people to be more libertarian.
Yes.
It's really funny when I go to a libertarian group here in Atlanta. Our state chair, we were hanging out, and most of the people at the table came from the left. They were Democrats before they became libertarians. Our state chair, actually, he made it a point to point out, like, Sarah, you were a conservative before, right? I was like, yeah. And the people at the table look at it like, wait, the trans person at the table used to be a conservative? Like, what? It just blows people's minds sometimes.
I love flying it. By the way, I'm sorry I looked distracted. I was looking it up to see if Pelosi is an investor in Vanguard Group, and I haven't found the answer yet. But if anybody, by the time we put this out, I'll let it flash on screen if we're right or not, so that it's not left unchecked.
Yeah.
How about that?
That works.
Yeah. So Cole, when you're doing it, here we go. Put it right here. Yes or no. What I was going to say is, I like that you're you can be you can sort of fly under the radar, because in certain situations, because people make assumptions about you. I'm sure we talked about that a little bit when you were hanging out here in Austin.
Oh yeah.
So people make assumptions about me and my friend Mystery Chris, who does a show with me. because I guess maybe sometimes because of the way I dress or what, I don't really look as much like an SJW as I used to, but they'll still make assumptions. And even my neighbor was like, "Oh, I thought you were a leftist because you dress kind of funky, like you live in Austin." I'm like, "What? No." But people make those assumptions, and they'll make them about Chris because he's black, and I assume they make them about you if they can tell that you're a trans woman.
Yeah.
What is that like? Are there any funny stories of just people assuming the wrong thing for whatever reason?
Oh, no, that typically just happens online. They say transsexual and they're like, "Oh, this person's probably a good person to talk to." Oh, when I did my Dave Chappelle video, because I actually I did the video like I was shocked and outraged, and the title was "Trans Woman Reacts to Dave Chappelle," and so many people came in there like with their perceptions. They came in and they met, and their comments were, "I came in here fully expecting you to like be against Dave Chappelle, have all these issues with this," and they were like, "I'm pleasantly surprised you weren't." So it was like, it's like that type of stuff. When you look at my content, when I'm reacting to stuff, it gets big views. Again, when I did a trans woman reacts video to the Leah Thomas situation, same type of comments come in, and it's like I was fully expecting something completely different about it. When I was on Slightly Offensive last July, there was quite a few comments on there like that people on there were fully expecting me to be this far lefty trans person come on there, and they were like, "I don't agree with Sarah on a lot of stuff, but at least you can come in here and have a conversation without screeching about it." And I think that's where a lot of I get comments like that all the time. But it's interesting too, because I do a video about a trans person or something like that, and I get the comments in the section like, "It's he, why are you calling this person a she?" Like we were talking about pronouns earlier. People leave those comments in my comment section. I'm like, I'm a trans person. You really think I'm going to just go out of my way to misgender this person? Like, do you not realize, like, did you not watch the video and find out that I'm a trans person?
Or just, hey, you do you, I do me. Like,
exactly. Those comments are just funny.
Have you ever thought of just doing a funny, like a spoof video where it's called, where the subject has nothing to do with any trans issue, like reviewing a new movie or something, and like a trans woman responds to the new peanut butter?
I haven't thought about that title, no, but that is funny.
And then it has nothing to do, because you prime people to think, it's going to be something about transgender ideology in this peanut butter. And you're like, nope, I'm just telling you what I think of the peanut butter.
That's a good idea. That's funny. I should do that. Because I talk about all this other stuff on my channel. I just don't put those headlines in there.
Yeah. A trans woman, but you got to turn around like that old viral video of the groundhog. That's
one thing I've started trying to do is doing better intros to my videos. So like the Dave Chappelle one, I think I was like, "I watched the Dave Chappelle video, so you should too." And then I was like, "Y'all thought I was gonna say so you don't have to."
I like it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Like the latest video I did was on the whole Joe Rogan controversy. With everybody, and I started. I was like, I think I said, I was like Neil Young removes his stuff from Spotify. I was like, I was like, that's too bad. Sweet Caroline was a good song. And then I look off to the side and I go, wait, what's that? That's not him. Oh, that's Neil Diamond. Who's Neil Young?
I like that kind of humor.
So that's why I always try to do something as like a hook at the beginning of a video now. Like that's one of those tricks I've started to learn.
My
Be a
husband
little bit
sent
more
me
funny.
one of the funniest things I saw with the whole Spotify Joe Rogan thing, and it was a fake headline that said Yoko Ono threatens to upload all of her music to Spotify if they don't get rid of Joe Rogan. And it made me laugh so hard because I just watched recently, sometime in the past couple months. If you haven't seen it, you need to go look up on YouTube, look up Yoko Ono doing a cover of Billy Joel's Big Shot.
Oh.
And it's the music like dun 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 dun, but it's her and the microphone just going just screaming, and then it's like at at an art gallery and there's people standing around like, this is good.
Yep. That's
It's
great.
silly. Anyway,
Oh.
Sarah, I've gotten way off subject, but
That's
I
fine.
want to talk to you again. We want to have you on Unsafe Space to hang out
Yep.
with us come Friday. Why don't you tell people again where they can find you online if they want to check out your podcast or follow you online?
Yeah, so youtube.com/Sara Higdon. And then it's so on Twitter and Instagram, it's Sara Higdon with an underscore after it. And then you can actually go on to sarahhigdon.com and it has links to all of my stuff. So whether it's Rumble, Odyssey, I'm on all those platforms. I also have Apple Podcast and Spotify Podcast. So you can pretty much find me anywhere. There's also links to just like some of the radio interviews that I've done with Austin, and I had a op-ed published in the Libertarian Republic talking about rights and stuff like that. So if you go to sarahhigdon.com, there's a whole links page that has all my stuff that I've done. And that's about it.
Tiger's barking and freaking out at the mailman. Hold on. Anyway, thank you so much, Sarah,
Yes,
for giving us your time today and your insight and your story. And I hope everybody goes to check you out. And I hope I get to talk to you again soon.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was so much fun. Always love to talk to you.
Cool. Take care.